Hey, welcome everybody to another episode of Talkin Fitness. I have a special episode today. Today we're going to talk about mental health. Um, Before I introduce my guest today, I want to talk a little bit of the reason why we're doing this. First of all, this is a fitness podcast and we talk about our physical fitness, but very rarely do we talk about our mental health. And that's, without mental health, our body is nothing. So the main reasons why I'm doing this podcast, and of course we could sit here and probably talk for hours. And these are the things that we're going to talk about. First of all, we're going to talk about mental health, the issues that deal with mental health, considering this is mental health month, the month of May. We're going to talk about some suicide prevention, suicide awareness. I will say that, obviously we're not going to get directly, how would I say it, in depth as far as suicides, but I'm a deputy sheriff and one of my guests is also deputy sheriff and victim advocate. We may tell some stories and it's not to scare anybody, it's not to gross anybody out, it's just reality and what people need to know what's going on out there when it comes to mental health and suicides and suicide prevention, especially with our children. And that'll be our next topic too, will be your mental health of our children, and especially with the coronavirus and social media today and the increase we've seen in suicides and suicide threats with kids. And then lastly, we're going to talk about first responders, especially law enforcement. And when we get to talking about that, Dr. McIntosh, he knows that we can attest to that, being law enforcement officers, the stress that we, especially today with everything that's going on. And we're not going to talk about politics. We're just going to talk about dealing with what's going on today and how to overcome it. So first, let me introduce our first guest, and she's the reason why we're here. She's our guest of honor, and that's Miss Alina Studoff. I knew her as from running one of the largest mental facilities, I think, in Florida, which was called the Centers. But I believe now you're at the courthouse, correct? Yeah, I lost all your microphones.
Yes, I am.
Okay, there we go. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what you do at the courthouse.
Well, I am working with court administration, and I now am the manager of all of what we call problem-solving courts for the 5th Judicial Circuit. And that includes, of course, the 5 counties, Marion, Citrus, Lake, Sumter, and Hernando counties. But I, of course, my home is in Marion County, and that's where most of our problem-solving courts, which are our drug courts, mental health courts, veterans treatment courts, and DUI courts, as well as juvenile drug courts and teen courts. So I supervise the staff that run those programs, but previous to that, I had a 30-year stint with the centers, and I was the administrator of the acute care services, which is the psychiatric hospital that is the crisis intervention facility, crisis unit, where you would bring your adults and children under a Baker Act or a Marchman Act, which are involuntary processes here in Florida.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're going to get into all this just so everybody know the Baker Act is like you said, the involuntary taking someone into, I guess you say custody, but and then we take them to a mental facility for treatment. And every state has their own, and every state has their names. And I think actually in California it's called like 5150 or something like that. I don't know. Don't ask me how I know that. I just I've heard it in some songs and stuff before. But to still talk about you, I was going over your resume, and I can assure everybody that's listening that you are definitely more than qualified to talk about this subject. So if anybody wants to know your full resume, just contact me and I'll send it to them, because it's too much to say on the air. We'll be here all day. But you are more than qualified, and welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. And Miss Cindy Turner, she's one of the victim advocates for the sheriff's office. Tell us a little bit about your experience, Cindy.
Well, I've worked in victim services for 16 years. Of course, Alina is one of my mentors who helped me into what I do today. So basically, I am a juvenile intervention specialist now, where I focused mostly on juveniles, but have worked with adults that are suffering mentally And I've also been a addiction counselor, and I worked at a larger addiction hospital and did treatment plans, et cetera, for those who suffer from addiction as well.
Cool. And you work with me too, so that's really cool.
Yes.
All right.
Everybody says, who is that? They want to know who the Hulk is.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't get Macintosh started. All right. And that's last but not least is Dr. Charles McIntosh. He's one of my coworkers, one of the deputy sheriffs, and I'll let him tell you what else you do. We want to talk about that.
All right. Well, hello to everyone. I started my career with the Department of Corrections. I worked with that agency about 15 years, and I moved on to full-time law enforcement. Like Jason said, at the sheriff's office. Back in 2015, I had an opportunity to move over to the College of Florida. I now serve as the Dean of Criminal Justice and also the Dean of our programs. So my responsibilities include degree programs, certificate programs, and also our recruit academies. I also serve as a commissioner on the Florida Criminal Justice Standards and Training Commission. And again, I still serve as a deputy.
Cool.
So thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here, man. And you're also one of my my fellow weightlifters too. So
Yes, I love
to lift, and so we got some stories that we'll share with everybody. Okay, so let's start off first. I figured we'd throw some stats out there and talk about them. Now I've come across some stats, and Cindy's got some stats here. The one that hits me the most here, it says that 1 in 5 people will experience mental health in their lifetime. There's another stats. Well, we can talk about COVID later. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in ages 10 to 34, and 78% of them are men. Let's hit on some of those, and then we can throw more stats in. And like I said, this is informal. We're talking about these things, and if anybody wants to jump in, just jump in. But Ms. Dudoff, you're the Goomba in this, so we'll let you talk first.
Well, I don't know about Goomba, but you know, it's true that it's scary that the statistics you just said are very frightening, and not so much frightening, but when you talked about the mental health stats, actually diagnosable is actually 1 in 4 have a mental illness. And what we tend to forget a lot of times is that depression is the most prevalent of all mental illnesses. And sometimes we just sort of slough off depression. And trauma is, of course, the trauma we experience in our lives can impact us significantly. So, post-traumatic stress disorder or any trauma-based disorder, as well as depression, again, the two very prevalent, very treatable, however, very lethal mental illnesses. And so a lot of the suicide rates come from that. And when we're talking about populations that are experiencing trauma, I mean, with COVID and with the news media constantly in our faces with if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead. So, those are the things that we're exposed to constantly are traumatic events. And it doesn't have to even be traumatic events that we experience. It can be ones that we are hearing about and seeing. So, you and the profession that you're in, of course, are very at risk, but the population and the public in general, of course, we have much more, we have a lot of information on the more severe and persistent mental illnesses like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. But again, the most prevalent are the ones that we don't even sometimes recognize as a mental illness. We just recognize it as phases or something we're going through, which is, unfortunately, something that can be quite serious and develop into something much more significant for us. And they're biological issues. These are biological disorders of the brain. I do the suicide prevention training at Marion County Jail, which is part of the sheriff's office. And it's something that we talk about all the time because it's unfortunate. If you have a mental illness, it actually makes suicide, gives you a higher rate of suicide. If you experience a lot of trauma, higher rate of suicide. So it is something we should all be paying attention to. And as law enforcement, as anybody in the health profession, anybody who values their health and works out and those things, people are going to look at you as the authority health, including mental health. And so therefore you are going to be approached and asked, what is the best way for me to do anything? And that would include how to keep yourself healthy on a mental health level as well, not just on a physical health level.
Now, prior to, and we'll talk about COVID, but prior to COVID, were you still seeing a steady increase in cases?
In suicide, you mean?
Yeah.
Suicide rates? Yeah, well, at least in our county, yes, unfortunately, the rate is pretty high.
Yeah.
But yes, unfortunately, that is something that has been going up for a while. Again, I think it's what we're exposed to, in our media, as a country. I think we see a lot of violence. We see a lot of things that sort of expose us to trauma.
Yeah.
And I know our teen suicide rate had gone up quite significantly, even pre-COVID. So that was a concern. Again, I don't carry all the statistics. I tend to sort of keep away from the statistics because I think it is something that's a very individual thing, and it is important for us to pay attention. But the statistics are what prove to us that it is happening.
Yeah. Cindy, anything you want to add to that?
No, and the other thing I do want to bring up eventually is the stigma and why people don't get help. It's, especially in law enforcement, military, my husband is both. I don't feel would ever come out and say, I need to talk to somebody, because first of all, you have to go through the chain, and then you're looked at differently once you ask you need for help. So that is something we must work on for just anybody. And I'm not just using law enforcement, military, it's pretty much anybody, the stigma. I went through a divorce about 25 years ago. I had a what you would say, a situational depression, and I was scared to talk to anybody. Eventually, I was on a low dose of medication. I needed it just for a little bit to get better. But the stigma is why I didn't go until it was so severe that my friends encouraged me to go talk.
The very sad thing with that is Cindy is so right. It's depression and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, are not as much. PTSD is not as prevalent, but depression is the most prevalent of all mental illnesses. But it's also the most treatable, yet it is, even though it's the most lethal, it's what I call the most of the most. It's the most prevalent of all mental illnesses. It is the most lethal of all mental illnesses. It is the most treatable of all mental illnesses, as well as PTSD. However, it is the one that goes most untreated, because people just think it is something that either they can pull their bootstraps up and snap out of it, or they don't want to clump themselves in a population that's considered mentally ill. And so the stigma keeps people away from getting something that is so treatable, and that if they don't get help could be so lethal. And sadly, that's where we tend to hit upon resistance, is because people don't get help for it.
Yeah. And I was going to say, that's where Dr. Mack and I come in, get involved as law enforcement officers, is usually the ones that won't get help. Now, hey, Doc, in the academy, are they teaching that to the new recruits now, the mental health aspects?
Yes, we teach. And prior years, I mean, there was like little snippets in the book.
Yeah, there was only a little bit back when I went.
Right, the new curriculum, the newest curriculum will come out July 1 of this year, and we've added a lot more, some post-traumatic stuff in the book, as well as dealing with diverse communities, which includes, dealing with those, suffering from mental illness. But, in a 770-hour curriculum, can we, present them with every situation that they're going to encounter? No. It's going to be almost impossible. That would probably be a 770-hour course within itself.
Yeah.
And especially, I'll just reiterate what's been said already, just the stigma. And I'm not surprised at all that the rate of, suicides attempt by males, is so high. Because, as males, a lot of us, I know when I was coming up, you were taught, just suck it up, and keep going. But unfortunately, that's probably the worst advice that you can give someone. especially a man, whether that be a man or a grown man. You know, that's probably the worst advice. You know, as I've gotten older, I realized that that's the worst advice that I was given. You know, coming up as a young man, just suck it up and keep going.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get ahead of in the podcast, but that's why it's so important, you know, to have an outlet, you know, such as, you know, physical fitness.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that as a competitive bodybuilder and someone that works out a lot, it helps me. And I was when Cindy and I were talking, and we couldn't remember exactly what the diagnosis was, but your body puts off a chemical reaction when you're stressed out and stuff, and when you're working out. Is it the lactic acid buildup, I believe, or serotonin or something like that?
Cortisol.
Cortisol. Okay.
Which
knew it.
actually retains fat in the central part of your body, which protects your heart.
Okay.
So, or, you know, supposed to be, but that's also as cortisol builds up, if it doesn't get released, then it actually holds on to fat that can act, which is actually supposed to be a protective thing in the short run. But if you prolong stress, that's where it can actually cause damage.
Yeah. Well, do you think that medication alone helps people with depression? I know some people need it, but do you think there's other alternatives than medication?
Actually, in everything that we're taught, when I say that, like depression, for example, and post-traumatic stress disorder, that it's the most treatable, there is a gamut of treatment. There rarely is usually just one thing that you should do. The medications now compared to when I first started in this field are leaps and bounds ahead of where we used to be, and less side effects, less issues. So, you know, again, that's important. And but no, it's definitely, there needs to be a whole gamut of things. You know, healthier living, eating better, therapy. I mean, treatment, what I call talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, anything that actually, especially with things like trauma, the more you're able to process a traumatic event, and that process is talking, is one of the ways of processing it. And that when you're talking about, you know, bodybuilding, yes, you might be working out, for yourself, but you're usually never doing it alone. There's usually a spotter, there's usually somebody with you. And if you work out as well with someone from your own field who understands kind of the issues you will and will not talk about, but that you can share with. I'm married to a first responder. My husband's a firefighter, paramedic. And so they actually have a better built-in system of talking, joking, because they go back to the firehouse, they're together. Law enforcement, again, I don't want to get ahead of the podcast either, but law enforcement, you know, you have a critical incident or a traumatic event that occurs, whether you want to recognize it as traumatic event, if it induced any type of fear in you, which of course people sometimes don't want to admit that they were afraid, but they were. You can't help your body's response to that, whether you are tough or not. And you get back in singly now, because they're rarely partners in law enforcement anymore, and you continue with your day, if you're lucky, actually.
Yeah.
Having some type of outlet, again, even if it is with a partner of some sort that understands where you're coming from, is part of your own field, gets the language, gets the stigma, gets the whole, and process it that way, talk about it, joke about it even. I mean, I know you have to be careful of your audience when you're joking, because not everybody is going to get that joke.
No.
You know, so you have to be really careful about that. But again, if it's just 2 or 3 of you, that is so helpful, because every time you process it, the less that event is stifled down and comes back later to haunt you.
Yeah.
So there's a gamut of, I know I just went off your question completely, didn't I?
No.
But yeah,
You're good.
there's never just one, they're really hardly in anything. You know, even if you're getting cancer treatment or treatment for other medical issues, and mental health is considered a medical issue, there's never just take this and don't do that. It's take this, take these vitamins as well, try to walk, try to work out, try to live a overall healthier life. And that is always the advice. It's never, eat all you want, but here, take this pill for your cardiac issue, but go ahead and eat everything fatty and never move. That's never going to be the recommendation.
And the other thing I can add to that Elena brought up, for my treatment plans for my person suffering from addiction, I always put exercise, and most of them were not very healthy. You know, they had been addicted for long periods of time, and I would literally put on their treatment plan, they had to walk the field, you know, 4 times, and they would come back the next week and say, wow, Miss Cindy, I feel better. I've lost 5 pounds, you know, and it's just that self-esteem for feeling better and looking better. They would say, can you put it down for 6 times this week or whatever, when we had treatment plan. Well, it was actually about once a month for treatment plan review. But most of them, I'd say 90% of my clients actually asked for me to up their exercise plan. And they said they wouldn't do it unless it was something I assigned them to do. They didn't have that quite willpower yet. But I would up their treatment plans. I put aerobic activity, things like that. So it just that mindset helps you clear your mind when you know how it is when you're pumping, and it's just a great way to clear your mind.
Yeah.
Well, there's so much more to that as well. I mean, the dopamine, especially with addiction, usually the substance floods the brain with dopamine, which is that incredible feeling.
Mhm.
And that is hard to replicate in life. And so therefore the drug becomes where I get that high, that feeling of the brain flooding with dopamine. Well, exercise does that now on a much smaller scale, but it still does that. So when you have nothing that's flooding the brain with dopamine, all you want to do and all you think about is, how do I get that dopamine high again? And one of the things that happens when you exercise is that dopamine flood. Now, again, never at the level of the drug, but it's the closest thing in life. Well, there are other things, of course, but the closest legal thing or something that we can actually talk about on a podcast without being bleeped out is that exercise and aerobic activity is predominantly, but almost any exercise does cause a dopamine flood in the brain, which is going to be one of the closest things they will start to get eventually as the brain starts to recover to that high. And that's hard to, I mean, even for those of us who never have issues with addiction, it's still hard for us to get out there and work out. But we always say after we do it, God, I can't believe I didn't want to do this, because once I'm done, I feel so good. And that's the flood. I mean, that's important.
Yeah.
And I just want to add, the reason you would bring up addiction and why I have brought up addiction is there's an 80% correlation of addiction with childhood trauma. So therefore, these children that have suffered produce mental illness, and services for mental illness in the state of Florida, we're 48th in the nation in receiving services. So that's why I just bring up the addiction population as well.
The mental health side as well is the serotonin. So with the mental health, especially with depression, serotonin is one of the things that actually the brain, we actually have inhibitors in our brain to stop it from flooding. And the medication actually stops, it's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, are some of the medications that allow the brain to get that good feeling or that elevated feeling. Exercise does that naturally as well. So that can help somebody with depression. Again, it's never going to be the only fix, but it is certainly a great addition to any treatment that's recommended. We had talked about this before, but the National Alliance on Mental Illness, I use a lot of their videos when I train. And when they, at the very end, when they talk about all the things that you can try to do, of course, they have medication, they have see your doctor, but they always have that little barbell to add, and they always have the food. So they're always saying good diet and exercise are vital to the overall mental health of a person.
No, I agree. Now, Dr. Mack, you and I maybe have a experience a little bit different when we show up to a call and someone's threatening to kill themselves. I know as a law enforcement officer, and you can jump in on this too, when we walk up to a house and someone said that they're inside, they're thinking about killing themselves, I think our mind actually kind of goes into a little bit of a stress level too.
Right. I mean, because you don't know, literally what's on the other side of that door.
Yeah.
They're saying, yes, I want to kill myself, but you have to play the what if game, and that we're always taught that from day one in the academy, I always play the what if game. What if this person does want to harm themselves? What if they want to harm me too? Or what if they really don't know what they want? But regardless of what the situation is, whether we're going by ourselves, depending on what the situation is, what kind of urgency we're dealing with, or we're going with, a team of guys, we have to go, so we don't get to make that choice.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate, we have lost some brothers and sisters because of that, because of someone with mental illness, and just not knowing. There's a lot of unknown in that. And you had mentioned too, Ms. Dudoff, about mental illness was the only illness that law enforcement responds to, and not medics. It's not a medical response. It's us.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's
I never thought of it that
illness
way.
is considered, mental illness is considered a medical emergency.
Yeah.
However, when 911 is called around a mental illness, it is not the paramedics that responds. It is law enforcement that responds. So it's the only illness, other than some substance issues, but it's the only illness that law enforcement responds rather than an ambulance.
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing we have a doctor on staff. So
I find that medical staff don't respond, to those emergencies, but also, and again, not wanting to get into the politics of it, what a lot of other states are doing. They're not sending law enforcement officers to some of these situations. They're starting to send, counselors or personnel or whatever they're calling them, in their respective states. So I find that interesting, and I'd be very interested to know how that's going for some of these states. There's a lot of media coverage about it when the ideas were being born, but I don't hear much about it now. So if anybody has any input, I'd love to hear.
Florida is looking at not sending law enforcement, and it's because that's how they're sent out. It's not that I don't think that the EMS would not respond to that, but they're not sent out when there's a mental health emergency. It's law enforcement. But I think even Florida is looking at sending out in accompaniment with law enforcement, having teams that go out, including a mental health professional. And actually, the sheriff's office is kind of ahead of the game, because they've always had crisis intervention specialists that may respond right after, but at least are part of your team. And even in Marion County and a lot of counties in Florida, they are looking at crisis response teams. Claremont has a crisis response team, which has a mental health professional that's partnered with a law enforcement officer that respond to mental health crisis. So there are that is starting to even happen in Florida. And I think it's a good partnership. Of course, again, law enforcement is going to be the first responder. It doesn't matter who you bring with you. They're going to make sure they're paying attention to the safety of those around you. So it's always going to be you first. It's always going to be you making the call, because that tactical approach has to be your call, in that emergency.
Yeah.
So it's nice to have that option backing you up, but you're still there first. It's still, and it's still you having to make those decisions. And those are some traumatic and big decisions to make on a spur of the moment. And it's tough. It's a hard call.
Yeah, it is.
So I just have to throw this in because Mac's here, or Dr. Mac. I'm not sure what they're calling now these days that you're a Dr. Mac, but anyway, I get those new recruits and I go, I know y'all are here to cup and stuff, but I'll say, always tell them 80% is social issues, and most of those social issues are mental illness. And it's usually after Alina trains them in the Baker Act procedure, which is our 72-hour hold in the state of Florida. But they will come back to me time and time again, and they tell me, I never realized, how prominent the issue is in our county is where they work. So, but it is a serious problem, and people are needing help. And I do want to add 1 in 20 suffer from a severe mental illness, which would affect your daily living. So.
Right. Oh, no, you're fine. You make a good point, about the recruits. And that's part of my day one speech, because we're trending towards a time where a lot of recruits that are very young, some, just fresh out of high school, or some did a little time in college, and now they're wanting to work in law enforcement. And that's no knock on them, because almost 24 years ago, and I was 19 years old, and I wanted to be a state trooper, and I ended up starting corrections. But that's neither here nor there. But I always want to dispel that adventurous part of law enforcement, that they think that's all that it is. It's not about the car chases, or it's not the gunfight at OK Corral. It's none of that. Like you mentioned, 80% of it, you're going to be writing reports. You're going to be taking calls for mental health. You're going to be answering 911 hangups. So I do try to tell them that's part of my day one speech, that it's not all about the exciting stuff that you saw in all these movies, or Law and Order. So thank you for mentioning that, Cindy.
Yeah, whenever I train law enforcement, either in the Baker Act or when I used to do the crisis intervention team training in Marion and Citrus counties, I would hear all the time, "I'm not a social worker. I'm a cop. I'm not a social worker." And unfortunately, if you're working with people, you're going to have to, it doesn't matter. I mean, even if you're not dealing with the mentally ill, someone in a crisis situation, you've just been robbed, you've just been hit, you've just been mugged, you've just been in an accident, it escalates and puts us into that fight, flight, or freeze, where the part of our brain that's currently working is the part of the brain that's just reactive and not really thinking things through. Mm-hmm. So even under the best circumstances and the most healthy, put together person, when you're dealing with them, they're in a crisis mode. They're in a responsive, reactive mode. They're not at their best, regardless of how healthy they are. So you're going to have to learn to de-escalate all types, not just the mentally ill, and not, so you're dealing with that constantly. So if you can't give yourself some of those, that ability to deal with that, you're going to be in a sad way. So it is important. I'm glad that you do that, because they need to know that it isn't all that you see on Law and Order. Because I always thought the courtroom was what I saw on Matlock, which of course most people hearing this won't even know what Matlock is. But yeah, that's what a courtroom was like. You talk through it and everything worked out in the end. Mm-hmm. Nope.
Well, I happen to love Matlock and Perry Mason, so that's that.
Oh yeah, I love some Matlock. So let's talk about kids. Cindy, you said you had some stats on the suicide rate with kids, which it's unfortunate, but we need to say it.
You have to unmute, Cindy.
You're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. 11% of our young adults, which are 18 to 25, have serious thoughts of suicide. I can't really give you the stats in the nation, but I can tell you in our small community, we had 8 teens kill themselves in the last year, which is a pretty high number. And a lot of kids have been Baker acted. Again, that's the 72-hour hold, because they develop anxiety from staying home. And I just to pitch this just for a second, but there was a lot of unseen kids for a while who suffered from physical and abuse and neglect from their parents, which could cause, instability, causing Baker acts. So we did see quite a heightened state of Baker acts in our community. When I talk to parents, it's about their anxiety and mostly the children that suffer from anxiety and depression, being, in their not able to leave and having that fear. They become paranoid. All these symptoms come up because they cannot communicate for a while before even the centers got telehealth. Again, we have a rural area. Not everybody in our community, in our county, had internet service, so they couldn't even do their internet. So our school system did get together and have little groups if they could sign on, just so they can have that togetherness. And like Alina mentioned before about like bodybuilding, that support to know that they're not alone.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think it is that, do you think it's mostly the social media that those numbers are like that?
Yes, social media bullying is way up. I don't have the stats on that, But a lot of our Baker Acts there's reports of bullying by social media. So
I think almost 99% of the Baker acts that I've seen lately have been through social media, either Snapchat or something like that, where they've made some kind of statement to one of their friends.
So something we discovered on the school portal, we use Microsoft Teams at our in our county, and many kids express how they're really feeling, not realizing, that it's recorded. We had, as you know, Jason, several this week that like, I have a gun, and the other kid responds, makes student go bye-bye. A lot of kids say they want to kill themselves. A lot of kids have Googled how to kill themselves on these computers that were given to them because of the pandemic, how to kill their parents. I mean, they just get to the point where they're just wanting to have that connection and don't have. So they start Googling how to hurt themselves, how to, do self-harm to themselves and others.
Yeah. And I can tell, and for the people watching this, as a parent, as a father, as a law enforcement officer, you need to check your kids' phones. You need to look and see what they're Googling. You need to look at their apps. Look at their apps close, because we know there's hidden apps. There's all these hidden stuff. Look at the games they're playing. Look at the music they're listening.
I highly suggest for mental well-being, because lack of sleep is a huge problem with mental health. My neighbors, they turn their kids' internet off at 8 o'clock at night. They're done. They have no internet. My godson knows that if I say, give me the phone, he gives it to me and I look in it. It happened one time. He goes, can I have 2 minutes? And I said, yes. And from that moment on, he never had to have that 2 minutes, because he never thought I would check his phone. It only took one time. And then when I realized there might have been something on there that shouldn't have been, he was more cognizant of it, and he made sure there was nothing on it, because I would have took it and he never got it back.
Yeah.
So that's very important to know your passwords and security. And there's a lot of hazards with children having phones. That's all I can say, really.
Yeah. And
yeah, I'm definitely in favor of that. And my little godson, we've had him. Well, it's my son. We've had him, almost 11 years now. But I collect that phone every night, and that room, it turns in, I don't want to say it's a prison cell, but that's pretty much what it is. You at night, you got your bed and your nightlight, and that's pretty much it. And I go to bed. Everyone goes to bed. There's not going to be any, talking through Xbox or cell phone or any of that. Like you said, rest is important for these kids.
Yeah, that cell phone can
And
cause a
Jason,
lot of
I do want to, and the last point I want to make about juveniles, the LGBTQ community of juveniles, they 50% have severe or serious suicidal ideations. So they are the ones we really watch and continue to follow up with and ensure they're not being bullied.
Yeah, I agree.
Because 50% is a lot. And that's it. And it also goes over to the adults too, same percentage.
Yeah. Ms. Studoff, you got anything to add to that?
No, just, we tend to forget that the brain doesn't fully develop till we're almost 20, till we're around 25. And so therefore, and the part of the brain that doesn't develop is the frontal lobe, which is the executive function, is where we make good decisions. So in adding to that, if they do any substance, it adds to the lack of development of that frontal lobe. So good choices and good decisions are not just because, oh, they're a teenager. Yeah, it is because they're a teenager, because they're a child, because that part of the brain has not. So what stops that part of the brain from developing properly into their 20s is it's stopped by drugs, it's stopped by trauma, and it's stopped by stress. And so all the things you were just talking about cause stress, trauma, and therefore that part of the brain that actually teaches us later in life to make good choices, to stop and think, and is this the right choice for me? That part of the brain is not fully developed until mid-20s. And so it's really important to realize that everybody says, well, privacy and my child, and well, your child is not able to because of a physiological issue. And so therefore, that's why they're your child, and you help make decisions for them, because they're not really capable, even though they will tell you they know everything prior to 18, and they will tell you they can make all of these good decisions. But even just basically physiologically, they're not there yet. And yeah, you have more mature, every child is different, and based on their background and, nurture and nature and all the things around that. Of course, I'm not saying clump everybody together, but yeah, there are reasons why, again, 18 versus 21, if I can join the army at 18, but I can't drink till I'm 21, well, your brain is closer at least to developing at 21. And alcohol and other substances stop that development. I don't think children should be in the military either till 21, because head trauma can stop all that as well. But if we're going to choose, that's kind of why 21 is the drinking age versus 18. That was the science behind that reason. It wasn't if I can be in the military, I should be able to have a drink. It's that brain development issue that was part of the reasoning behind that. And so they're not making good, rational, reasonable, and that's why suicide is so high, is because they're not thinking that through necessarily, and they're not talking to anybody. And during COVID, when they're even more isolated, it makes things even worse, because there's no one except on social media to talk to, and then that can be disastrous in itself.
Are you noticing
That's
a
all
lot?
I have.
Are you noticing a lot more adult children staying at home?
That's been a trend for a while, but
Yeah.
I'm not basing that on any statistics.
Yeah.
That's just like family and friends around that.
Yeah,
that I've
yeah,
seen,
and I'm not trying to say this to upset anybody, but I notice a lot of people I know more and more as their adult kids are staying home longer, and I'm wondering why that is.
And I've also noticed that I remember, of course, this is in the, archaic times, but I couldn't wait till I was 16 and could get a driver's license. Now there are kids who are 16 and really still happy with mom and dad driving them around.
Yeah.
I have my grandnephews and nieces, and they're not that, they'll get their license even, but it's not I couldn't wait, but it's not mom and dad. They're still cool with mom and dad driving them around and carpooling, and
I can tell you,
noticed that.
and Dr. Matt can tell you too, from working calls for the last 10 years and going to houses, and you pulling in, and a mom's saying, I'm having a problem with my son, he's out of control, and you walk in the bedroom and there's this 32-year-old man sitting in the bedroom, and
Yes.
Is this the person you're talking about? Yeah. He's perfectly fine. There's no no physical disabilities or anything like that. I understand there are some that need to stay home, but yeah, it's sad.
It's different mentality, and I don't know what changed, as far as our society, or I can't even say that's generational. It's just something that just changed, and and I guess if it works for them, but I know when I was 32, I couldn't live with my mom. I had 18 years. That was plenty enough for me. So.
And nothing to do with how much you loved her, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing to do with that.
No.
Yeah, I was ready to go.
Yep.
Oh, cool. Well, and then I won't keep you guys
Jason,
too long.
before we stop, I do want to give some warning signs that, maybe you've developed a mental illness. Most mental illness, 75% are, of people know that they're mentally or have some type of mental illness by the time they're 24, and 50% by the time they're 14. But, if you see yourself changing mood, not wanting to get out of bed, I have a little cheat sheet here. I know some of these things, but start hearing things. That doesn't necessarily mean you're crazy. That's the thing. When people have these symptoms, like, oh my God, I'm crazy, I don't want anybody to know. And it actually can be a medical issue. A UTI can cause hallucinations or delusions. So there's so many things. It doesn't mean that you're crazy. You have a significant weight loss or gain. There again, it could be mental or it could be medical. These are things you just should, check. But most importantly, after I do all CITs or CISMs, which are briefings we have after a traumatic incident with deputies or law enforcement, we come together and talk about it, what's going on. But what we always tell them is if your spouse or your coworkers notice a change in your behavior, like you're not able to stay awake, or you're very irritable and you weren't, or you were very irritable and now you don't talk a lot, we make sure to let them know after a month or two, then maybe you should seek out to talk to somebody.
Mhm.
And if you're that person that's noticing these changes, and it doesn't have to be a spouse, a friend, a coworker, I'm known for saying everybody's an advocate. You have to advocate for what you believe in. And if you feel your friend is suffering from a mental health issue, let them know. Let them know that you see the change in their behavior, their mood, their expressions. Let them know you're willing to help them however it is. Help find a doctor, help find a counselor. Ensure them that it could be medical for some of these symptoms.
Mhm.
And, just making that connection is the first step. And that's just what I wanted to say to help those who are suffering, because there are many that suffer.
Oh, I
And
agree.
also, I want to add to that, Cindy, those are wonderful examples and absolutely right on the nose, because it's the change in behavior that sometimes gives us that first, wait a minute, something's not right here. And we want to make sure that we are paying attention to that, but also realize as law enforcement officers, you're also the authority, whether you think you are or not.
Mhm.
And I don't mean the authority as you're a law enforcement officer, but people will come to you with things, and you know this already, with things that you feel are not that you are not the expert in. And so therefore they're going to ask you, well, do you think you know where I can get this, or do you know where this can happen? And so you want to make sure that you are paying attention to that, and you're going to know your coworkers, because sometimes at home they're quiet anyway, or they're hyper vigilant. They've always been hyper vigilant as a law enforcement officer. You don't sit with your back to a door. You're always looking around you, and those are not good traits off duty.
Mhm.
Those are great traits on duty, but sometimes we have a really hard time shutting that down. And we want to make sure that if you notice it in a coworker, because often you will notice it, and so again, approach them, and you're always going to be careful how you approach them, because you don't want to shut them off or turn them down. But again, it's all in the approach, and making sure that they know you're there, and that you're not going to judge them, and that it is important to talk it out. It doesn't matter with whom, and if you can, and sometimes referring them to a primary care physician, like Cindy is saying, it could be medical. So primary care physicians are also trained to recognize those things and look at, and sometimes treat, if it's mild, treat any issue that could be treated very, immediately, and or make a referral, just like if you found a lump, or if you found, you're having chest pains and your left arm is hurting.
Mhm.
You're going to seek somebody who may then refer you to a specialist, but that it is good to at least check with your primary care to make sure that you're addressing the situations. But you're looking for changes, and never, ever, never, I don't care whether you're in the medical field or what, so you can be Dr. Mack or not, suicide is never to be kept a secret. It's never a secret. Nobody can say, will you keep a secret? Are you bound by HIPAA? Child abuse, adult abuse, any type of abuse, and suicide, no HIPAA. We never keep that a secret, because the importance of addressing that is much more significant and important than saying, okay, I will hold your secret or keep your secret from you. So for you, so you want to always make sure that you connect them to what they need to be connected to. And like you said earlier, every state has an option. And if it's a law enforcement officer, there are always employee assistant programs. And employee assistant programs keep it confidential, even from your bosses.
Mhm.
So now they will sometimes have to assign duty to work, whether you're capable of doing your job. But again, if it is something that is in its infancy and very potentially mild and able to be stopped, absolutely is the time
Mhm.
on the onset to get that addressed and taken care of, where it wouldn't have to get to the next level.
Yeah. Well said. Well, that kind of put us into our last section about first responders. And so I'm dedicating this show to an officer that we lost, Officer Adam Rendell. And it's a very touchy subject, and it's hard to talk about because nobody talks about it. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast, was to let first responders know that hey, it's okay to talk about things, and it's okay if you need help. And we're under a lot of stress, especially today in today's society and how law enforcement is looked at. And Mac, you can chime in on this too, but ultimately our goal, obviously.
Just real.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, man.
So real quick, just brief about Adam. I came over from Department of Corrections and went through the crossover training and FTO and the whole nine. So Adam was assigned to Marion Oaks, and I was a new guy. I was a rookie cop. Knew a lot about corrections, but knew nothing about law enforcement. So what often happens, we're short, that night. So I ended up taking a call in Marion Oaks. So I traveled to Marion Oaks from the north end of the county. And of course I get in Marion Oaks, and the roads are all crazy. I don't know where I'm going. So finally I get to the house, and it's a domestic call, and a young lady and, her boyfriend, they were arguing, and he's a truck driver, and they're wanting to break up, and he's wanting this stuff, and, he's raising sand, she's raising sand. So, he was a fairly, large guy, and, I'm not a small guy, but again, it's my first time really having pushback, dealing with somebody on a call, by myself. So I'm there, and me and the guy are I'm trying to give him a few orders, and he's again, give me some pushback, and I look around, and Adam is just there. He's just standing there, and just Adam just being there just gave me another, 6 inches on my height, and, and all of a sudden I had more muscles, and, and it was just amazing. So just a little small piece about Adam, and, and I still carry, a lot of people already know this, but I have a teddy bear in my truck. Yes, I have a teddy bear. And I still carry Adam's picture, and that picture, that teddy bear holds that picture, and when I go somewhere, and I always say I take Adam with me. So just a little piece about Adam. So sorry if that was a bit much.
No, it's fine, man. That's what we're here for, to share stories. Adam and I were pretty close. We were training partners. We worked out together, and we worked a shift together. I was actually his supervisor. The good thing about Adam was he knew how to draw the line between, he knew me being a supervisor where he had to draw the line. Now, I didn't stop him from joking, so because we all know he was a jokester, and Adam was funny, and you wouldn't hear from him for a couple of days, and all of a sudden you pick the phone up and he would say something sarcastic like, Nasworth's getting ready for a show, and then he'd hang the phone up. And then you wouldn't hear from it again for 2 more days. That's just what kind of sarcasm he had. But the only reason why I'm telling these stories is nobody really saw it. Nobody really saw anything that would show any signs of depression or anything. I know he slept a lot, but he worked nights. So but I hung around him
For
a lot.
years.
Yeah, for years I hung around him a lot. We talked a lot. We talked about everything. We talked about family, life, in the gym, and it's just one of those things you never know. Sometimes people do things you just don't know why. You don't have an answer. Best thing we can do is just learn from it, I'm assuming.
Right, and I wouldn't be hesitant at all to blame that stigma they were talking about. Adam was Adam was the Hulk. I mean, so for him, probably going to somebody, hey, I'm having some issues, that probably would have taken a lot, and obviously it was more than he had in him to go to someone and say, hey, I need some help. So, but again, just very tragic, very unfortunate, and just a loss for all of us.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to add something to that.
Please.
Predominantly, I work doing Baker Act training all over the state of Florida, predominantly in Marion and Citrus counties. And in just those 2 counties that I know of, because also understand that when a law enforcement has a suicide, it's not always marked down as a suicide for several reasons. The stigma, secondary, insurances in the family and the type of funeral. We've not evolved or progressed to the point that anybody recognizes that sometimes that suicide is because of the job. 99% of the time, that is because of the job, because of the trauma and the exposure and all the things and the types of things you have to witness and see. So more law enforcement officers die by their own hand than that of a felon or a perpetrator or somebody out in the field. And I know of at least 5 between Marion and Citrus counties that I knew. I've heard of at least 7 or 8, but that I knew personally that were ranked that way. And I didn't know Adam. I didn't know one in Marion County, and I may have known him from training, but so I knew of several and there's several. They're not just those reasons. There's sometimes shame issues or charges or whatever is going on. Things that happen.
Yeah.
One in Citrus County was a murder suicide, and we try to pretend that it's nothing to do with the job. Unfortunately, the type of job you have is very stressful, and especially now with all the things that are happening around. I try to remind law enforcement officers that you deal with 3 to 7% of the population, but yet in your eyes, most of the population are criminals. So, we have situations where 1 or 2 law enforcement officers are bad eggs, but the 99.9% of law enforcement, 999% of law enforcement are stand up, really want to be there and taking care of us, and that's who we call, that's who we want. But it's a tough job, and so self-care is vital, it's important, and working and being there with each other and reducing that stigma is such an important part. It's a lot of why I work with law enforcement. I'm married to a fireman, but everybody loves firemen. Everybody, firemen, it's there, but somebody's got to be there for the cops, right? Somebody has to love them. Somebody has to be there and say, I'm in your corner. And of course the uniform helps, but it's again, it's so, and I know I'm making that light, I'm making a joke, but it's important to pay attention. And yes, if anybody can hide it, we always say 80% of the time we know that somebody is going to hurt themselves. But there's a 20% of the time, and I'm promising you, if there's any population that can figure out a way to hide it, it's going to be law enforcement.
Yeah. Because
they're so good at, you're having a bad day and you have to go on a call, your whole bad day has to be behind you when you take care of that. You can't bring that with you. And even though, yes, it's hard not to, you're there as a professional, and it doesn't matter that your child just ran away from home. It doesn't matter. You're dealing with that situation, and that has to be pushed down. And so law enforcement are great at shoving things down and holding it back and putting on that brave, strong face. Thank God. Sometimes.
Well, I think that speaks to, and somebody said this earlier, Jason's been doing this job a long time, and for me, between, of course, corrections first and then law enforcement, it's been up to 24 years. In that time frame, you see a lot of things. But whether you work in corrections or you're out working patrol, you can see death, you can see injury, you can see these traumatic events. But it's in the next 30 minutes after that event is over, is business that you kind of have to. You don't have time to sit back and kind of reflect on what just happened, because the call screening is still filling up. So you really don't have time to do that. And when you don't have an out, and those thoughts, sometimes they'll creep, in your mind. And I can't say that, well, I will say that, there's certain things that I've seen in my career that I'll never let go. And one of those things being a few years ago, a young man, him and some friends came up from Tampa. They were diving in that quarry, up on Gainesville Road. They saw it on YouTube. And when the dive team pulled that young man out of the water, a good looking young man, a promising athlete, and we had to tell his dad that, he drowned, and I never let that go, and I'm man enough to say that I can't let it go. I still see him. That's just one of those traumatic events that I'll probably never let go. And I've shared that with my crews. That's the one thing that, children, death, it eats at me. So, I don't see it, fortunately, death as a whole as much as I used to, only coming out a few times a month, but still that one event, I'll never let it go.
As much as you can talk about it, the better, but you're absolutely right. I mean, it's you're exposed to so much, and we forget that it's cumulative. And even when we've done debriefings, Cindy and I have done debriefings for law enforcement, for again, for other first responders, it's different, but for law enforcement, it's often still active investigation. You're not allowed to talk about it.
Right.
You're not really supposed to say. So here we're saying, talk about it. So who can you talk to about it with?
Yeah,
Very
nobody.
likely nobody, or another law enforcement officer, either who was involved. But again, even then, it's at some point, that's at the moment you're allowed to, as much as you can, you need to share. Just saying that right now, it's so important, because you're talking about your years of experience. I promise you, I have done debriefings where we bring some senior guys in who weren't part of the incident, but can share past incidents. And we'll have young rookie law enforcement saying, man, I would have never said anything if that senior law enforcement officer, that senior cop had not said he struggled through that. Because no one wants to seem like the weak guy. And so when somebody's there saying, man, that was hard for me, I never let that go, I still see that, I still, that still makes me shiver, I still carry this with me. They need to hear that.
Yeah, that's an important point. And we always, this catchy phrase that, and I just started hearing it, the past couple of years, humanizing the badge, but what you're talking, that's really humanizing, the badge, and not everybody is as huge as Jason, but, being it's not about, just being a tough guy. It's not about, being able to win, every altercation you get in roadside. That's not the job. And the more, people like yourself, Ms. Studolph, can bring light to that. I mean, and Cindy, I think is amazing. I think work that you're doing is amazing, and we need more of it, profession.
Yeah.
I do tell the recruits, that yes, you'll see dead persons, babies, other traumatic events, things that some of these deputies go in houses that are just deplorable, that can't even fathom it, from their own childhoods. And I say, you never know what call. It may not even be a death call. It could be something totally different that affects you, and talk about it. And I always try to tell my guys, listen, I'm here for you. I know I'm your friend, but you just let me know. I will guide. If I can't help you, I will guide you to somebody that can. And that's I've worked hundreds of deaths, and there's one or two that affected me, and I've worked very similar deaths and they don't. So that's what I try to get the point across. When it does affect you, talk to somebody.
Yeah, there's a cumulative stress, the straw that breaks the camel's back, something minor that you say, I've dealt with all of these huge calls before and they didn't bother me as much. And then this tiny little thing, like this child that didn't drown, but almost did because mom was overdosed or snapping on the couch and wasn't paying attention. The child didn't die. I was at 6 other calls where the child did die and they didn't, but yet this one, it was like, that was the last straw. I could, it doesn't matter what the call is. It's going to, that cumulative stress builds up. And finally, the little thing is what you're like, how did that affect me? Well, it wasn't that really. It was all those 20 other things that you had to handle and move on that built up eventually. So I appreciate that, I want to say on behalf of the civilian population, I could not do what the 3 of you do. I could not look. I mean, if you took me to a call and these things were happening, I'd either be bawling or screaming or hiding or who knows. So there is a special breed that does this. So we don't want to say every law enforcement, that you're weak or this is gonna happen to you, or you are definitely gonna get PT. No. You are already a special breed. You are a breed that you're drawn to this business because you can handle, for the most part, these types of issues. But you're not Superman. You're not, you might look like it, but you're not, you're not this invincible. And so we appreciate those of us who, like me, who could not do this or I might be puking on the side of the street. My husband's a paramedic, and he describes things at the dinner table that no way, couldn't do it. So glad that you are able to do it, because we absolutely need you to, but we need you at your healthiest.
Yeah.
We need you both physically and emotionally and mentally healthy, so that you can continue to do that. So idiots like me don't ever have to step in and try to figure it out.
Thank you.
Jason, I want to give my quick story of Adam, just real quick, if you'll let me.
No, go ahead.
I was his dispatcher for 10 years on night shift. So you know how much of a bond we had from the comm center back in those days. I mean, we were just like family. Well, when I became out for the victim advocate, it was in the peach orchards of all place, Mac. And it was a big property that had like this 8-foot privacy fence all the way around. And it's very unusual for the peach orchard, because nobody knows what the peach orchard is, but it's anyway. And it was a little shack in the middle of like 10 acres with this 8-foot fence. Well, Adam's already there with the wife. It was a death of an elderly person. And I park outside of the gate because I'm scared to pull in, because it's, first of all, sugar sand. And second of all, I don't know what's in that gate. So I walk up, and no lie, a Florida panther walks right in front of me.
Oh, wow.
And I scream bloody murder. I didn't carry a flashlight. It was one of my first nights on night shift as a victim advocate, yada, yada. And Adam comes out and goes, "What are you screaming about?" He's just joking with me, because everybody has a nickname. He called me by my nickname. So I get up, and I'm still almost like crying, y'all. I was just, Alina, we cry on calls too, because a Florida panther almost ate me alive. And I said, "I just can't believe a Florida panther just," and that lady goes, and I don't want to say a bad word, so I'll dub it, but she goes, "That darn thing has ate all my chickens." And Adam goes, "There's a real Florida panther?" So from that moment on, he held me and walked me back out to the car, and he put me in the car. It was so much. I mean, he was just an awesome guy, always happy go lucky. And, we all.
His heart was as big
put
as he
up that-
was.
Yes.
Yeah, it was.
Yes.
Well, I'll end this out here, and then we'll go back around one more time if you want. But I'll just say, as a first responder and as a law enforcement officer who's been doing this for over 20 years, at what you do at the end of the call is just as important as you do as what you were at the call, if that makes sense. Once you close your call out, after that call is just as important. Whether it be, for me, excuse me, it's lifting weights, exercising. If you like to fish, hunt, just talk to people, just do something, get active. Don't just sit at home and drink. That's definitely not going to be the answer. Find something to do, find somebody to talk to, and I'm going to put the phone number here for the hotline at the end of this podcast, but and we'll go back around the room. Everybody can just kind of give their advice on someone to seek help if they need help. And I just want to thank all you guys for coming on the show today. It really means a lot to me, and obviously it means a lot to the family and everybody that's worked with Adam. So thank you. Doc, we'll go around the room. I'll hit you first, then we'll get the ladies.
Okay. All right. Well, much like Jason, my pastime pretty much is the same thing. I like to exercise. For him, it's bodybuilding. For me, it's powerlifting. I like to eat. He doesn't. So I mean, that's the difference.
I still eat.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's so important, at the end of the day to have an out. And I'm blessed to be in a unique position now. I still get to go out and work calls. And I get to help shape the next generation of law enforcement officers. So again, it's a blessing. I can't ask for much more. And for whoever's listening, there's nothing wrong with saying I need help. I real quick, when I went through leadership Ocala, and one of our sessions was, out of the ropes course, and not to say too much about it because I know it's like really top secret. But one of the exercises, we had to get out of this obstacle, and that's the one thing you had to say to get out. and none of us could get it. You had to say, I need help. We can ask whatever questions we wanted to ask, but nobody never asked, can you help me? And if I could just pass on one thing, if you're struggling with anything, just ask somebody, can you help me? So thank you again, Jason, for having me.
Yes, sir. Thank you for coming. Ms. Dudoff?
I want to just reiterate some of the stuff you guys just said. Balance is so vital. I know that sometimes we identify ourselves, we say, I am a cop, not that's what I do as a career. And so having a balance outside, because your job is already a hypervigilant, high stress, high trauma job. So outside of the job, having that balance, whether it be bodybuilding, whether it be a spiritual balance, fishing, whatever that outside, family, spending the time rather than always being the cop, and keeping that level of hypervigilance and stress outside of the job is certainly not a healthy, way to be. And it's important to have that balance and seek out each other, have that ability that even if you are socializing with other law enforcement families, that's a good thing, as long as they don't bring your stress up, because you get to see people what they look like relaxed. Hopefully that's what, that's the ideal. And so you actually do get to know each other better, and actually you are able to see that change. You're able to see that. And I know that law enforcement tend to socialize with each other because there's a trust factor as well there. But having that balance outside of your work is vital, and making sure that there is that beach ball of what I call a beach ball. You have all the different parts of your life that is important to make sure you touch on. Don't just do that one thing, do everything well. Really work on being healthier physically, mentally. That is important, but it's what you do for a living is too important to not have that other side that keeps you healthy. So it's I appreciate it. I thank you for letting me be on here. It was a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be. I was actually pretty nervous about it. You guys were pretty cool and relaxed about it. And in my 25 years I've been working in this field for 30 plus years, but I've been training law enforcement for 23, 24, maybe 25 years by now, and all in this area. So I really appreciate all that you do, and seeing a lot of you grow up. I mean, I knew you back when you were, before you were the Hulk and the Superman and all of the things you were.
Well, your husband taught me in the academy.
Oh, God. So, yeah, there you go.
I say that. I waited till the end to tell you that.
Thanks. And you talk about some young rookies now. I look at them and I know they hate this, but I'm wondering if they really can buy their bullets. I mean, does somebody have to buy it for them, or what? Yeah, I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that I'm so old that they look like babies. Yeah. So yeah, I appreciate. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of this.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for all you do.
All right, Ms. Turner.
Okay, well, it's hard to follow the two best acts, but I will repeat: ask for help, find your balance. But one of the things that I try to get my units to, and they're all mine, all the deputies know they're mine. I identify them as my deputies because I was their dispatcher for many years, is to do self-care. I've worked those 12-hour shifts for most of my 21-year career. It's hard to get off after 12 hours and go to the gym or take that moment to yourself. I highly suggest before going to bed at night, do a little mindfulness meditation, and people laugh at me, like my husband. But if you take those deep breaths, what it does is it puts new oxygen into your brain, into your blood, into your health. It actually will help you sleep better. And if you think about it, when you're in that stressful situation and you always go, well, that's your body doing it naturally. And if you would practice it every night during those stressful situations, a deep breath here and there will help you. And I'm not just talking about breathing, but maybe reading is your thing. Walking your 10,000 steps or however many steps you do. We always laugh about Mac because when he drops them bars, it goes bam. And I know Sergeant Snodgrass turned the lights out every time the bar dropped. But it's your self-care. So either do it in the morning or at night, but take care of yourself, because you can't take care of anybody else if you don't. And I am so happy you asked me, I should say Sergeant Nasworth, I was honored to be here.
Well, I'm honored to have you. Thank you. And like I said, again, I'll put the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. I'll put that below. And for those that seeking help, there's a simple thing on your phone called Google, and there's a lot of resources on there. Am I right? So
Yes.
ask Google. You can find a lot of resources to help yourself, but nothing's better than talking to somebody. So, all right. Well, thank you all for coming. And this will conclude our show. Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you.